overall. It has a nice vintage look to it. I even put some wear marks, if you can see that, in the fingerboard, and I'll show you how I did that in a moment. So I'm just going to take you through the steps of how I did this, and but let me just make this disclaimer that I assume no liability if you try this yourself and you're not happy with the results, because I'm just showing you what I did, but it's up to you if you want to take that risk with your own instrument. Okay, so with that out of the way, let me start with obviously step one, and that is really the hardest step of all, because most of these necks have a coating of polyurethane on them. Now this one, I didn't think it did because it didn't have any shine to it at all. I really couldn't tell that there was anything on this neck, and so I put a little stain on the back to test it, and I waited 24 hours and it was still sticky, too sticky for that length of time. So I knew that there was some coating preventing that stain from getting into the wood. So the first step in doing this is, unfortunately, having to sand all that polyurethane off the neck. So that's really the hardest step, and the one step that you're going to put a lot of muscle into. So what I did was I used a 320 grit, and just I went over it. You don't want to stay in one place too long, because you don't want to dig into the wood and make the surface uneven. So long strokes, the entire thing, and then I finished with the 400 grit. Now, if there's any insignias that you want to keep, okay, then I would recommend that you just use the 400 and go very lightly over those insignias so that you just get the polyurethane off and nothing else. Don't use the 320 there, because it'll dig in too quick and could start to fade out your insignias. Then on the fingerboard, what I did was, well, starting like this, I took a tip from a guy on YouTube, and I used a brand new razor blade, like from a box cutter, and I just very lightly scraped all the way down, at an angle, very lightly, so it doesn't dig in too much to the wood, and it's gonna, you're gonna see a white powder as a result of that polyurethane coming off. And I went all the way down, and then I flipped it around, and I did it this way, going down, so I got the whole thing. After I did that with the razor blade, then I took the 320 grit sandpaper and went over the whole thing again. So I just wanted to make sure that I got all that poly off of it. And so then I went on, from there I went on to step two. I think I got it all covered. All right, so for step two, I used Minwax Golden Oak, because I happen to have this in my garage. That's why I use this one. There are some stains that are I think a little lighter than this one that I've seen online, but I happen to have this one, and this is one of the most common, the Golden Oak. You could find this one anywhere. Some of the lighter stains, I think they had some. There were a couple of mahoganies, I believe it was, that looked lighter than this in the samples that they showed. So they might be better, but they'll be harder to find. You might have to order those online. Most home centers will have Golden Oak. That's a very common one. And the other thing I used for the orange, Rust-Oleum Gloss Enamel. You're going to do this, just get the basic, the original, enamel. Don't get the one that says paint and primer in it, just as a precaution. It might not make any difference at all, but I didn't want to take a chance, so there you go. So those are the two that I used. And the way I did it was, it's convenient having all these holes from the tuners. I just hung it up. I've got an IV pole from a hospital that I use to hang things from. And so I hung it up like this, and I started with the back, right, because I wanted to make sure I liked the way it was coming out before I did the front. So I started with the back, and here's what I did. Okay, so I took this open container, and I use this bristle brush, but you can also use one of those, what are they, the foam brushes. You can use one of those. I like this one. So I took this open container, and I tilted it, and then poured a little bit of the stain in. You don't need a lot. The stain goes a long way, so just a little bit of the stain. And I tilted it so the stain went to one side, and then I took the spray paint after shaking it up, and I just sprayed it. I gave it like 4 or 5 shots. I didn't need that much. I went a little overboard with the orange, so I would say give it like two shots, maybe 3. And whatever you do, don't spray it right on the stain, or it'll probably splatter up at you. You'll have a mess. Okay, so I did that to separate them. And the reason I didn't mix up a big batch is because I applied it the way an artist would use a palette. You know how they mix their paint with their brush. That's the way I applied this, because what I wanted to do was partially combine the 2 substances, but also keep them a little bit separate, so I'd have a little variation in the finish rather than have it one uniform color. So that's why I didn't mix up a lot of it. So then I just swirled it lightly, trying to get more stain on the brush than the orange. So I just swirled it so I got a little orange in there, and then starting at the top, I went down. Now, the one thing I did differently than you would normally do with stain. Normally with stain, you put it on pretty heavy on a piece of wood, and then they tell you wipe it right away. Wipe off the excess till you get the right, darkness or lightness, whatever you're trying to get in the wood. But I figured if it looks good, I don't want to mess with it, because you don't have a lot. Once you start wiping, you don't have a lot of control over how it comes out. And if you have to put a second coat on, that's risky, because every coat of stain you put on means more of the stain gets absorbed in the wood. So you're going to reach a point where it's so dark and it's absorbed in the wood that no matter how much you wipe it or sand it, you're not going to get it any lighter, because once it's in the wood, that's it. It's done. So I didn't want to take that chance. So instead of putting a lot on my brush, I just swirled it and made sure that I only had a minimum amount, and then I just carefully, just like an artist, just carefully brushed it down, because I wanted to just put one coat and not wipe it. It was looking so good that I thought, this is the way I want it to stay. I'm not going to mess with it. So I went all the way down, and when I got down to here, I just left it the way it was. I waited to make sure there weren't any runs. Then I flipped it around, and I did the same thing starting from here, going all the way down. I was careful right here. I should have put tape over the nut, but I was lazy, so I just did it carefully. I made sure that I didn't have too much on the brush, and I just went carefully on that side, carefully on that side, and then from there I just went across all the way down. Now here's a tip for you if you're going to do this, because this is something I found out when it was too late. I got, this thing is hanging here, so it's swinging, right? So I get to the bottom, and I'm trying to do the bottom, but it keeps moving, and I couldn't hold it in place because there was no place to hold it. Everything was wet. So if you're going to do this, I would recommend, because I wish I had done it, but it was too late at that point, take a screw it partially in the bottom, have it sticking out. So when you're hanging it like this, or let me do it this way, you're hanging it, and when you get to the bottom, you can hold it by the screw. You can secure it by the screw while you brush it. So there's a tip for you. Something I learned doing it the first time. Okay, so then I waited 24 hours. Now this cures in 8 hours according to the can, and this is 24 hours. So I waited the 24 hours. Actually, I waited longer than 24 hours to make sure that it wasn't going to be sticky. So once this was, really dry to the touch, then I went over it with, I think, a 600 grit, just very lightly, just in case there was any roughness from the stain. I just went over the whole thing very, very lightly, and that's about it. Now, for the to do the wear on the neck, I took this rounded edge X-Acto knife, and I just kind of, scratched it, and I used my 30-year-old Strat, as a guide. But you can look up pictures online of a worn-out neck if you want something to go. It's always best to use a picture, because then you know what you're going to get. If you just kind of wing it and just kind of, whatever comes into your head, you don't know how it's going to result. You don't know how it's going to look, and then it's too late to change it once it's done. So you're always better off going online, finding one that you like, and then using that. Print out the picture if you can, and just use that as a guide. And then I just scratched it. I just scratched it to the shape I wanted. And once I had it the way I wanted it, then I used a pencil. I used this color pencil. Basically it's brown, but the color is light umber. And I just colored it in. That's all. Just colored it in, rub it, and I think it looks pretty authentic. I'll know better when I have the strings on. Now the last thing I have to do before I put this all back together is to put a logo on here. Okay, I finished my relicing project. I got the guitar all back together again, and I gotta say I am digging the action on this guitar. It is as low as it could possibly go, and I'm getting just some slight buzzing, not much at all, and I haven't set it up yet. So I should be able to eliminate the little bit of buzzing that it has. So I'm really happy with the way this turned out. I have my logo on here. I used my stage name for the logo. And the way I did that was, if you could see this, that's the stencil that I made. And what I did was I printed this out on this heavier paper. It's a heavier stock, the kind that you use for making a birthday card. It's for greeting cards, so it's heavier paper. And so I printed it out, and then I put it under this magnifier lamp with an X-Acto knife, and I just cut it out very slowly and very carefully. But there's another trick that I did with this, because sometimes no matter how good your stencil is, you put it down and you spray your paint over it, and sometimes the spray gets underneath the stencil, and then you get overspray and it ruins the job, right? So what I did was I took some of this clear silicone caulk, and I use this stuff a lot if I want to. I use it like an adhesive. If I want to stick something together that I'm not sure I want to keep it that way, I'll use this caulk. This stuff will hold as good as any adhesive, but the nice thing is if you decide, I don't like the way it looks, I'm gonna take these things apart, whatever it is, you just take a blade, an X-Acto knife or something, and you just carefully cut underneath the object to cut the caulk, and then you just lift whatever it is off. So I use this stuff a lot. But anyway, here's a trick for you. What I did was I put a little of this caulk on my finger, and on the back of the stencil, I just rubbed it all around the cutout area. I used my finger because I wanted it just to be a thin coating. I didn't want it, because when I put it down on the guitar, I didn't want the caulk to all, squeeze out around the cutout area. So I just put a very thin coat on there. And then what I did was I placed it where I wanted it on the guitar, and then I took a heavy object. I used this, whatever this is. It's from a mic stand, an old mic stand, I think. I just laid that weight on top of it to keep it pressed down, and I waited 24 hours. I don't know how long you have to wait with this stuff, but I always wait 24 hours. I just waited another day, and then I took it off, and this was stuck down, and I made sure that there wasn't any caulk in the cutout area. Now the nice thing about that is now the stencil is completely sealed, so you can spray away. You're not going to get any overspray or any runs. If you put the paint on a little too thick, it's not going to run underneath the stencil because it's now the caulk has it sealed. And so I just did maybe 4 passes with the spray paint. I just used a flat black paint, and I just went once, wait a couple minutes, whatever the spray can said, wait a couple of minutes between coats. So I just went 1, wait 2 minutes, 2, 3. I did 4 coats. That's it. And then I left it, for however long I think the paint dried in an hour. So that was great. And then I just carefully peeled it off. And of course, when I had this on here, I had the whole guitar covered with plastic, so it wouldn't get any spray on it. But yeah, once it was done, I just carefully peeled it right off. And then, I just I just carefully wiped around the little residue of caulk that was there. I just wiped it off, and I think it came out pretty good. Here's the finished product. I think it's looking pretty cool. I'm happy with it. So there you go. My Relic project, the end.